DJI's most loved drone of all time, the Mavic Air, has finally had a refresh. Introducing the Mavic Air 2.
This is Mavic Air 2. A whole lot.
Hi, I'm Ash from DroningON, and after many weeks of speculation and leaks, we can finally confirm that the DJI Mavic Air 2 was launched today. Keep an eye out for our Mavic 2 Air hands-on review coming very soon, but in the meantime, here are the headlines of this exciting new drone. So the most interesting one for most people will be the price. Well, the price is now confirmed as $799 in the USA, $769 in the UK for the basic package. And that basic package includes the drone, controller, battery, cables, charger, and a few spare props. As always, DJI are also going to offer a Fly More combo, which does include some additional elements. In there, you'll get 3 batteries, an entire spare set of props, ND filters, charging hub, and a nice carry case. The next one is a big one. 4K at 60 frames per second is brought to you on the Mavic Air 2. Now, you'll hear many content creators telling you that you need this. Well, you only really need it if you know what it's for. And essentially, 60 frames per second is a very high frame rate. It's not going to give you a cinematic look, but shooting at that frame rate means that you can slow the footage right down. Let's say, for example, you're capturing some fast-paced motorsport from the air with your drone. You can shoot at 60 frames per second, and then in post-editing, take that frame rate down to a lovely 24 frames per second, and you'll get some lovely slow-motion footage. And remember that even the Mavic 2 can't provide 60 frames per second at 4K. Another lovely feature is that this is the only DJI drone that can capture 240 frames per second at 1080p. That's going to give you some incredible slow motion. Now another big one, 10 kilometers Ocusync 2. Remember that the earlier drones provided up to 8 kilometers FCC. This one gives you 10 kilometers FCC. Now remember, there are some CE exceptions here. So in the UK and most of Europe, plus other countries that are using SRRC and MIC, will only give you maximum range of 6 kilometers, but that's more than enough. And remember, you should always be flying these drones within line of sight anyway. This latest version of Ocusync also uses an updated H.265 encoding and gives you 1080p live stream. They've also optimized Ocusync for reduced interference, so that's exciting as well. Another massive headline, and this drone does bring multiple big headlines. 34 minutes of flight time, which is the longest flight time of any consumer-grade drone from DJI yet. That's very much thanks to the 3500 milliamp battery on board, which is a 3S lithium polymer, not a lithium ion like the Mavic Mini. So hopefully we shouldn't see any of these battery exhaustion issues that we see that tend to be bringing the Mavic Mini out of the sky. 8K Hyperlapse. Now this is a really nice feature that we've seen on drones before. In fact, this feature comes straight from the Mavic 2. It lets you fly the drone in 4 different modes: free, circle, Courselock, and Waypoint, and it basically lets the drone move nice and slowly through the air, capturing frames on a certain period, and you get some really nice effects. Another nice one, HDR, photos, video, and panorama. This is the only DJI drone that brings all 3 HDR modes together. We saw this on the DJI Osmo Action as well, HDR video, and it really does bring some dynamic looking video footage to the beginner. Now here's an interesting one. This drone doesn't just come with ActiveTrack, but it comes with what they're calling FocusTrack, which is a new bundle combining a number of different automated modes. So POI 3.0, ActiveTrack 3.0, and Spotlight 3.0. Let's hope that the provision of this new feature to the DJI Fly app may also unlock it for the DJI Mavic Mini in the future. It's unlikely because it depends on processing power of the drone, but you never know. APAS 3.0, and that stands for Advanced Pilot Assistance System, which basically lets the drone fly itself autonomously whilst it's following you and also during regular flight. So essentially you can point and go with the drone, and if it's heading towards a tree, the drone will find its way around the tree. Now remember that this drone doesn't have sideways sensing or upward sensing, but APAS certainly uses forward sensing primarily, and of course rear as well. And this drone has 2 sensors on the front and on the back. Another very interesting one is 48 megapixel photos. Wow. Now, the actual sensor itself is a 1/2-inch sensor, which is an upgrade from the original Mavic Air, which only had a 1/4-inch sensor. By stitching photos together in HDR mode as well, if you desire, it will create 48 megapixel photos for you. That's 8,000 by 6,000 pixels. That's a big photo. And finally, one that some might see as controversial, but for absolutely no reason at all. The US and Canada version of this drone will come with AirSense, which is ADS-B. Now, there's really nothing to fear about this feature. In fact, it's a great feature that helps you as an operator. It means that the drone itself has an onboard receiver, not a transmitter, so that it can receive the ADS-B signals from other aircraft nearby. And that means if you're flying and a manned aircraft comes near to you, it will show you on the app. Now, how anybody can see that as a negative is beyond me. I think it's a brilliant feature, and what a shame that it's only being rolled out to the American and Canadian model of the drone, not to the drone elsewhere. So they're the main headlines of this exciting new drone. Now let's dig into the detailed specification that we're very lucky to have pre-release. So weight is always very important to people when they're buying a drone, and the new Mavic Air 2 weighs 570 grams, which is a heavier drone than the original Mavic Air, which weighed only 430. The new Mavic Air 2 is also twice the weight of the Mavic Mini, which weighs just 249 grams. Now, perhaps the slight downside to the weight is that it's above the regulatory weight in most countries for drone registration, which is about 250 grams. However, in most countries, registration is cheap and simple and costs less than $10. So I really don't think that's a big issue, especially if you're able to fly a drone as capable as this. The folded size of the drone is just 180 by 97 by 84. And to help you visualize the unfolded size, we've put together this visual comparison. In there, we've put the original Mavic 2. On top, we'll now layer the new Mavic Air 2. And on top of that, we'll layer the Mavic Mini, just to give you an idea of how they all compare to each other. As we expected, the Mavic Air 2 is a perfect size as a mid-range drone for traveling. The Mavic Mini is of course super small, but it's not particularly capable in comparison to the bigger drones. And I'd rather have a more capable drone that's slightly bigger than the Mavic Mini, which is not quite as capable. Owners of the original Mavic Air will be pleased to hear that the Mavic Air 2 does have the low noise props. One of the big complaints about the original Mavic Air is that it was quite loud and noisy. An interesting one is that the Mavic Air 2 only has single compass and IMU. These are the central processing units of the drone that manage all of the sensors, and having just a single set means that there's no redundancy. Having a dual set like the original Mavic Air and also the Mavic Pro and Mavic 2 means that you can compare between the two sensing units and find a balance in case one is showing an error. Now, over time, technology does improve, and therefore this may not be as much of an issue, but it's certainly something to be wary of and was probably done to reduce costs. The new Mavic Air 2 has internal storage of 8 GB, just like the original Mavic Air, and I really love that feature because if you accidentally fill up your SD card, at least you've got a bit of reserve space. However, it is a shame they didn't increase that a little bit. We've already mentioned the impressive 1/2-inch camera sensor, but on top of that, you've got an FOV of 84 degrees, an aperture of 2.8. That is 1 degree narrower FOV than the original Mavic Air, and so you're really not going to notice a lot of difference. However, we have noticed that the focal range is now 1 meter. The focal range minimum on the original Mavic Air was just 0.5 meter. However, it's highly unlikely that you'll ever be flying the drone closer to something than 1 meter anyway. And if you are, you're probably a bit crazy. Still on the topic of the camera, it supports RAW mode, which you photographers out there will be very pleased to hear. RAW mode gives you far more flexibility in your editing and post-production. It's not something that's going to be used by everybody, but for those that want to use it, they'll be very pleased that it has it. In addition, when shooting video, you will get D-Cinelike as well. There are lots of photo modes on this drone. Some of them you'll already recognize, but there's one that stands out called SmartPhoto, and this is new. This mode has scene recognition, hyperlight and HDR, and it means that even the most beginner drone operators will be able to take great looking photos that don't need any post-editing at all. So for those of you out there that struggle to capture a photo and edit it, this will definitely help. One of the basics as well, the camera is of course attached to a 3-axis mechanical brushless gimbal, just like the original Mavic Air and like the Mavic Mini, so you're going to get beautifully buttery smooth footage. As briefly mentioned earlier as well, the new drone does have obstacle avoidance. However, it has front, rear and underneath sensors. It doesn't have upward sensors or side sensing. That is a bit of a shame because they could have even integrated basic low-cost IR sensing on the sides just as a precaution, but that all inflates the cost. And at the current pricing, it does represent great value. Finally, there's that new controller, which I'm not going to write off until I've had one in my hands. So there are the headlines and the detailed specification for this new exciting drone from DJI. DJI admit that it's a mid-range drone and therefore it's primarily targeted at people between the Mavic Mini and the Mavic 2 range. Whether you should buy one or not is up to you, and I wouldn't suggest rushing out to buy one immediately. Think about whether you really need a new drone and whether this drone offers something that your current drone doesn't. If you currently have a Mavic Mini and you're loving your drones, definitely buy the new Mavic Air 2. If you have one of the current Mavic Air drones and you love it, but the range and the interference annoys you, definitely buy the Mavic Air 2. If you have one of the Mavic 2 range, then this drone represents a lighter, more portable version that isn't quite as capable, but is certainly very impressive. So therefore that could be an option for you as a traveling alternative. However, the Mavic 2 range is already small enough for me. It is quite heavy though, so maybe the Mavic 2 Air is a good option. As mentioned at the beginning of the video, we hope to bring you a hands-on review of the Mavic Air 2 very, very soon, but in the meantime, we'll be publishing a lot more videos on what we do have from our pre-release materials. In the meantime, give this video a thumbs up if you enjoy this content, or a thumbs down if you're a little bit silly, and click that subscribe button. Thank you very much for watching.